Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, or indeed welcome for the first time if you've just stumbled across this channel. Look, if you are new here and you haven't subscribed yet, 60% roughly of my viewers tend to be, please do consider subscribing. I think we've got a pretty unique channel here, as some of my long time subscribers, well, I say long time, it's only been a year, but the early subscribers will tell you this is quite unique stuff that we do here. So if you're interested in UK politics and going a bit deeper than just looking at Westminster and parliamentary voting, this is a channel for you. It'll be great to have you along with us. Now, today we're doing our third in the preview series, looking ahead to the local elections in May 2026. Of course, there's elections to the Scottish Parliament in Scotland, the Welsh Parliament in Wales, and local councils, district and borough councils across various parts of England. We've already looked at London, or East London, last week, and this week we're going to go up to the northwest, which is what you can see on your screen. So we're going to dive straight into it. A note on how the local councils elections are going to work outside of London. So the majority of these councils across England, they're elected by thirds. So a third of the councillors are facing election in May. So if you had a council of 30 councillors, 10 would be up for election in May, generally speaking. Now, there is an asterisk to that because, of course, it couldn't be that straightforward. St Helens Council, which we will look briefly at in this video up in the northwest, and also Birmingham, which is obviously in the West Midlands, we'll look at in a future video. Those two are actually full council elections. And also, any council that's having or has had a boundary review since the last election, so they've had the boundaries changed in their wards, they will also have full elections as well. So there's a number of those, but the majority of them, they are a third of the councils being elected. And I mentioned that just to say that it won't be necessarily like this May, for the county council elections, where we saw essentially that the whole council change in some cases. That's just not going to happen for a lot of these, just purely for the fact that the maths won't allow it to. But there will still be significant changes. And look, we'll get straight into this northwest here, and you can see very much the same as the situation in East London. Very, very red up here in the northwest. And just for context, we are going to draw a line for this video just around this sort of greater Manchester area, so sort of Stockport, Oldham, yeah, up here. This is where we're going to end today. Burnley is about as far as we're going to go to the east, and then the rest of that sort of into Yorkshire then, and we'll cover that in a future video. So look, you can see it's very, very red up here, the same as London. And look, some of the majorities are stunning for Labour. 50 seats in Sefton, 31 seats in Knowlsey. You can see none of the other parties really getting close to them. Halton, almost 100% of the seats for Labour there. And by the way, this is my own map that we're using today. I've put this together myself, so it won't be quite as polished and neat and tidy as the election maps ones. It's not really my forte, but I've wanted for a little while to have my own maps to sort of use and show you guys. So yeah, apologies if some of the stuff looks a bit, not quite as pretty, but this is what I put together. Anyway, big Labour majorities here. Trafford, again, if you go into closer to Manchester, 43 seats there. Salford, 48 seats. Manchester, 87 seats. And you can see none of the other parties even in double figures. So just to make the point that Labour here, very, very strong, very, very much a heartland for the Labour Party traditionally. But let's just go and look a little bit deeper at some of these places. So look, that's the council level. I can also take you down to show you the ward level inside these councils. So here is the ward map, and again, it's my own map that I have put together. So there may be, again, not quite as pretty. There may even be some errors in there you spot. If you do spot any errors, let me know, because it will help me to make it better for the future. But so this is the same map essentially as what you just saw, with the wards, the ward levels, so the council wards, the individual areas of the council that vote. And you can see again quite a lot of red. As you go out into the rural areas, you can see the Conservatives actually did not too badly last time these councils were up for election, which was 2024, because as they're elected by thirds, you have an election every year, basically, to keep the council ticking over with a third each year. The exception to that is when there's a general election, I think, or something, is when they note that. No, so when the county council elections happen, they skip out. So look, you can see Labour did very, very well in the urban areas, the inner city areas. The Conservatives did quite well in the rural areas, but you can see there's already quite a lot of independent / other parties creeping in, and a fair amount, a smattering of Green as well. Of course, no Reform here, because even in May, as early or as late as May 2024, Reform frankly weren't really on the map. Remember May 2024, that's before Nigel Farage was back in the scene. Reform were polling below 10% in the national polling, and it was before the general election had been called. So that's the context. So very little Reform to be seen on the map as well. So starting off in a ward in the Council of West Lancashire, or West Lancashire District Council, I want us to take a look at Skelmersdale South, because here we see a story that we saw last week, in London, generally speaking, where Labour had these massive vote share advantages previously, and you can see here in Skelmersdale South, Labour won 90% of the vote in 2024, and that says, I can see an error already, that says 2025 division results, but ignore that, it's 2024. But 91 essentially percent of the vote for Labour in Skelmersdale South. Now, if you look at that nowcast map that we used last week for the London elections, I'm not going to use it for this week because I actually think it's been a bit too kind to Reform and maybe not kind enough to other parties. And in all fairness, that is for a general election, not local election. So I've looked at it, but I'm not going to lean all that heavily on it in this video. But on that nowcast, for a general election, they're projecting that Labour would win 33% of the vote, which is quite extraordinary. That's down 60%. Huge, catastrophic collapse in the vote. Now, will they collapse that far down in May next year? Well, I don't know. Well, they will have a big fall off, I expect, because Reform will almost certainly stand. The Liberal Democrats will probably stand. So there will be more parties probably contesting this ward anyway, which is naturally going to hit the percentage share for the Labour Party, just because there's more options on the ballot. No, it's similar across the other Skelmersdale wards here in West Lancashire. If we go to Old Skelmersdale, you can see well in excess of 70% of the vote, in excess of 75% of the vote for the Labour Party. In Skelmersdale's North, 76.5%, again over 3/4 of the vote. Townhouse and Skelmersdale Town Centre ward, again over 3/4 of the vote. So on all these Skelmersdale wards, they've got over 3/4 of the vote, and that is, as you see in some of those, against more than one candidate or more than one opponent on the ballot. So look, Labour have a big advantage in these places, and I think, as we've seen in by-elections recently, there is going to be a catastrophic fall-off, and I expect Reform will do very, very well in these parts of the northwest. Why do I think that? Well, because we actually had in West Lancashire an election happen this year. It is obviously part of Lancashire County Council, and so although these wards aren't exactly the same, Skelmersdale still went out to vote this year for their county councillors. And look, Skelmersdale East backed Reform with 41%, Labour on 24% of the vote. So even lower, actually, than that 33% projection from the nowcast in that one. Although you can see this ward extends quite a bit further north than where those... this electoral division for the county council extends a bit further north than those wards did. As we go more into the town itself, look, Labour, again, less than 30%. Reform, almost 50% of the vote in Skelmersdale Central. Skelmersdale West, a much similar story. Reform, over 40% of the vote. Labour not even getting a quarter. Bearing in mind, in all those Skelmersdale wards, they had at least 3/4 of the vote. So yeah, I do expect Labour's vote share to fall off dramatically. I think we may be seeing swings from 2024 of 60%, maybe even more, which is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And it looks like Reform will be the main beneficiaries in this area in particular. Much similar story in Chorley East. Again, Labour not quite 3/4 of the vote, but 71% essentially, if we round it up, against the Conservatives and the Greens there. Now you can see already, if you look at the bottom of this pop-up, you can see there's 2 seats for Labour and 1 seat already is Reform, I think probably via a defection in Chorley. So you can see the trend already emerging for what's going to happen to Labour. And again, this is heartland Labour territory. Absolutely it is. And if we go across again through the rest of these Chorley wards, you're going to see in excess of 50% of the vote for Labour across pretty much all of them. You can see they're comfortably over 50%. Chorley North and Astley, almost 60%. Chorley is where we just were. Chorley North East, 61%. So look, not the same sort of scale of dominance as we saw they had in Skelmersdale, but still very much the clear favourites, the clear winners in Chorley. And again, Chorley voted in May for county councillors. So how did Chorley vote? Well, look, slightly better news for Labour in Chorley perhaps than Skelmersdale, because they did manage to come out on top in terms of vote share in Chorley Rural East, but you can see they're down to less than 50% of the vote, so nowhere near as dramatic a vote swing here for Labour as we saw in Skelmersdale, but you can see Reform eating into them quite dramatically with 35% of the vote there. And again, bearing in mind these are electoral divisions for the county council, they don't match up perfectly with those wards, so we are slightly comparing apples and oranges here to a certain extent. They also managed to win the vote. Well, actually, no, look, it's neck and neck in Chorley Central. And again, look, bearing in mind those vote shares were getting on for 60% for Labour in Chorley, down to 35% and neck, literally neck and neck with Reform there. And in Chorley North, Reform managed to win 41% of the vote, beating Labour down to 35% of the vote. And the same if we go to Chorley South, even less for Labour, below a quarter of the vote again, Reform on 41. And actually here, the Labour Party finishing in third place behind the Greens. And look, the Greens, we know, are going to cause Labour a hell of a lot of problems at these local elections next May and in the foreseeable future. So look, that's two areas where you can see Reform in particular going to benefit, and Labour are we going to be seeing those numbers we're going to see of Labour's vote share dropping off are going to be absolutely extraordinary. All right, next I want to go into a bit further to the east and move into Wigan. And look, interesting here. Again, Labour clearly the winners in 2024. But look, interesting here in Worsley. I'm going to go with Mains, but I don't know if that's right. Please do correct me if you know in the comments. In this ward, Reform in 2024 getting almost a quarter of the vote. Now that's interesting because, you know, like I said earlier on, this is before Farage is back. This is before the general elections called. This is when Reform are polling very, very low, irrelevant, sort of 5-7%, I think they were in the polls in May 2024. So interesting to see that here, Reform are already getting up towards a quarter of the vote. So you can imagine, in theory, Reform's vote may well explode here in certain parts of Wigan in 2026. Similarly, in Hindley Green, look, not quite as impressive, 15% finishing in third place behind the others there. But again, like that's a very, very impressive score for Reform as they were polling at the time. And they've only got, obviously, extraordinarily more popular. And remember that if you've been watching this channel for any number of months, or a year even, the Northwest was one of the first areas that started going very heavily behind Reform. Labour were dropping seats on the nowcast. This is dropping seats in the projections to Reform across sort of Yorkshire and the Northwest. It was one of the first areas that I spoke a lot about. So you can see that already there was a following for Reform in the Northwest even before the sort of rocket fuel was added after the general election last year. Similarly, again, there in Hindley, look, or I think it's Hindley, 13%. Again, look, clearly third place behind Labour here were more challenged by the others that only finished about 8 points behind them. And look, others is going to be another big factor in this election, in this part of the world in particular. We saw in Burnley, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago that, or even last week, I think it was, the two Burnley by-elections, Labour lost both of them to independents. So look, that's going to play a big, big factor as well. And that's going to hurt Labour again. And this is what I mean. There's multiple fronts for Labour. Reform tend to be in a lot of places are going to hurt Labour. And then it's Reform and the Greens, or Reform and the others, or the Greens and the others. It's non-stop for Labour. There really are very few places where Labour can look to and say, yeah, that's our safe territory this year. Okay, I want to talk about Bolton and Bury next. And look, Bolton in particular, you can see the Conservatives actually did pretty well in Bolton in 2024, or as a result after the 2024 election. They've ended up with 15 councillors. Now, I don't know, I haven't actually looked into it. They may well have lost, they may well not have done very well and lost more. That's probably more likely. But look, they have a presence in Bolton, the Conservatives, and in Bury, less so, much more favouring the Labour Party in Bury. But you can see in Bolton, already this one's no overall control. You can see it's much more evenly split. Labour only 26 ahead of the Conservatives in 15, and others again playing a big, big part in Bolton on 13. So let's go and have a look at those wards. And yeah, look, you see some fairly respectable results here for the Conservatives. Almost 50% of the vote, pretty much 50% of the vote in Heaton, Lowestoft and Tumore for the Conservatives. You can see Reform there, again, standing up here in 2024. Much more like what you'd expect Reform to be getting in 2024, 2% of the vote. That seems more reasonable. Now, again, that's going to obviously, most likely, going to increase quite significantly. And look, I think the moral of the story with these Tory results. Here you can see they're already pushed very close by the Liberal Democrats, and actually the Liberal Democrats have 2 of the 3 seats in this ward anyway. So look, already you can see the Conservatives getting pushed pretty close in some of these wards. But I think the moral of the story is expect to see the Conservatives fall away pretty hard. I mean, we're talking about Labour, and they are going to have a devastating night, but it's not going to be pretty for the Conservatives either. I've said a number of times there is no sign of a revival for the Conservative Party, no turnaround in their fortunes or anything of the sort. So yeah, expect to see their vote fall away quite heavily. And of course, the main beneficiaries will be in a place like this probably the Liberal Democrats. In other places, it will be Reform, of course. And so I mentioned Burnley a little bit earlier. We're going to have a quick look at this because this is already a very multipolar council, if you will. If we just go across and look at the council itself, here it is, and you can see there's no overall control, and look how evenly split those seats are. Labour have the most, just about, with 14. The others, again, in second place with 10, and then Lib Dems and Conservatives both on 8, Greens on 5. So it's very split, Burnley. And I remember looking at the Nowcast a few months ago, or a number of months ago, and actually the vote shares looked quite like this. Obviously Reform in it as well for the Nowcast vote shares, but it looked very similar. 4 parties, I think 4 or 5 parties maybe even, on a very similar share of the vote. So Burnley clearly is very split politically. But again, Labour have these big vote shares from previously in these wards. Now look, what's interesting here, unless it's a mistake on my chart, which it may well be, you can see Labour got 87% of the vote in 2024, but all 3 councillors currently are of the other category. Now, that may be a mistake from me, but what's likely is that they're 3 defectors away from the Labour Party to either stand independent or be unaffiliated. So, look, that goes to show how sort of wrecked Labour are going to get in 2026. These massive vote shares are going to change really dramatically. Same again in Bankwall, Labour with 75% of the vote. According to this, it's 3 independent councillors now. So again, another 3 that they've lost. Look, they are going to get. Look, they might get wiped in some of these councils, not entirely wiped out to 0, but they're not going to be in contention for running the councils, which is quite extraordinary when you think of how red that council map is that we looked at earlier. And look, here's a very good example. The Greens already in 2024 were pushing Labour very close, only about 7% behind, 5% behind in 2024. So areas like this expect to see the Greens sort of surge through. Now, obviously, here we haven't seen as much Reform standing, so the Reform will obviously muddy the waters in certain areas as well. They will perform strongly in a lot of these areas that we're looking at. But the Greens is sort of where we want to focus next. So we haven't spoken about the Greens much, and I think in certain areas, the Greens are going to really punish Labour. So for this, we're going to move down into Manchester, and just to move that tooltip away, you can see, you can't really see the Manchester, unfortunately you can't see the council boundary, but just take for granted that this area with a Lib Dem island in the middle of it here is sort of, that's Salford there, and then as you come to the east of that, you're into Manchester, and this whole city area here is Manchester. And you can see, again, just how red that is. And we're just going to look at some numbers here, which, and I've got some numbers from the Nowcast to look at as well, which are quite extraordinary. So Deansgate Ward, Labour won 60% of the vote in 2024, and the Greens here at 13%, second actually to the Liberal Democrats. Now, the Nowcast Ward has this going green for a general election. It's areas like this in sort of Manchester, the cities, the urban areas where Labour are really going to be vulnerable to the Green Party. And look, remember, Manchester is a university town. The Greens, their strongest cohort by far is the 18 to sort of 25-year-old age group, who are generally, it seems at least, generally moving further to the left, although there are actually a number of them coming to Reform as well, so there's a bit of a weird sort of dichotomy there. But they are generally very left-wing, and they're not happy with the Labour Party, and they are going straight into the open arms of the Green Party. So Deansgate is 60% for Labour, 13% for the Greens in 2024. I think the Nowcast had the Greens up to about 35%, Labour all the way down to I think the high 20s or low 30s. So close, but had the Greens winning. And again, that's for a general election, but just going to show again these big vote share swings. Piccadilly's another one. Here the Greens actually pawned a bit stronger, getting over a fifth of the vote. Labour again about 60%. It's going to be the same sort of story. Those two going to switch places quite likely. Look, quite how much the Greens will eat into Labour's vote, we'll have to wait and see, because we haven't got as much evidence for the Greens doing it yet. I think they can. I think they will. But whereas with Reform, like, we can fall back on that county council vote earlier this year and say, look, we can see Labour have already lost a massive amount of votes to the Reform Party. The Greens just haven't quite done it yet for real. But they are, we saw in last week's by-election roundup videos. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, we do by-election roundup videos every Friday. We saw in that last week, the Greens did get some very, very good results. Although, and in Canterbury, that was largely at the expense of the Labour Party. So look, it's not outside the realms of possibility. Last one to mention is very much the same story. Labour, almost 70% of the vote last year. Greens on a fifth of the vote. They're going to switch places again, I think. And I've handpicked a number of constituencies here, but I think like across Manchester, the central area of Manchester, wherever it is the students live in particular, I think this could be a really bad result for Labour in Manchester. I think the Greens could do phenomenally well. Now, Labour have a big majority on Manchester Council, so maybe limited on how much damage in terms of seats the Greens can do to Labour, but in terms of vote share, I think they're going to absolutely tear them apart. And of course, mentioning those by-elections, there is a by-election in Hale this week, which is Trafford Council. The Greens are defending there. You can see actually the Conservatives are the main opposition to the Greens, and actually have a confession to make. There was an error in the by-election video. There was actually an error on Election Maps' site as well that I just sort of repeated. It's the Conservatives who had done quite well in the previous election, not Reform. I was so surprised to see Reform got 36% of the vote in 2024. And no, this was the Conservatives. So look, the Greens defending. We'll have to wait and see. Again, they've got to prove that they can bring the big game. Okay, next I want to come and look over close to Liverpool, look at Knowlsey and Halton. And these are areas where the Greens had already started, the green shoots, if you like, were there in 2024 to sort of lay the foundation of what they might do to Labour next year. If we look at St Gabriel's, you can see, look, it's Labour versus Green. And to be honest, I think a number of these wards, as you get close to Liverpool, they become a left-wing shootout. You can see the Conservatives didn't bother standing. Lib Dems didn't bother standing either. So the Greens, obviously, only two parties to vote for, but they got over half the vote. It was quite close with Labour, but here, obviously, they just nudged past them, and you can see they got 2 of the 3 seats in the ward as well. Again, here, Wiston and Cronton, you can see Labour over half. Again, only the 2 of them. Like I say, it's a left-wing shootout. This one kind of flipped back the other way, but you can see the Greens pushing Labour really, really close in these areas where it is, like I say, a left-wing shootout. Another one here, Roby Ward, Knowlsey, 50-50 pretty much. They're neck and neck here. And so just imagining the change in the vote shares that we've seen. Now, Labour's vote, I think, will hold up a bit better around Liverpool, but I think the Greens are very much a viable alternative for those Labour voters in this part of the country. So I do expect the Greens to pip Labour in these races where they were very close previously. And in Halton, look, less Green presence, actually. Again, it's a similar story with Labour with these big sort of vote shares previously. 71% for them down in Norton, South Preston, Brook. 75, again, a 3/4 of the vote, Halton Lee. 3/4 of the vote in Bridgewater. So, look, again, these are going to be big vote swing changes. Will Reform do well in Halton? I don't know. Possibly. It may be, I don't know. I feel like, again, Halton may be quite a left-wing area, but they do, I believe, have a councillor over here. This is a Conservative one ward last time, though you can see it's pretty much a 3-way split on the vote shares. But Daresbury Moor and Sandy Moor, Reform have a councillor as a result of a defection, I would imagine, from the Conservative Party. Look, it's going to be a catastrophic night for Labour again. That's all we're going to look at in this video, because it's already at half an hour or thereabouts. So that's enough information to get the picture. This is going to be another area of the country. Labour are going to get absolutely pounded by the Liberal Democrats, by Reform, by the Green Party, and slip of the tongue there, I haven't just spoken about the Liberal Democrats because I find them much harder to predict where they might gain seats. But I think they may well pick up a decent chunk of votes as well. From the Conservatives, yes, but I think also from Labour too, in the maybe more rural areas. So look, I've said it before, I've said it again. This is going to be a huge election. There's going to be big, big changes. I haven't actually laid out the roadmap. I'll do this on another video because I know by this point a number of people might have switched off. But the roadmap here, we're going to continue doing these preview videos. As we get close to the time, we'll start projecting who's going to actually win. And then the plan is, on election night, we will do the inaugural Election Watch UK live stream, and we'll watch the results come in together overnight. So if that sounds good to you, please do come and subscribe to the channel. Leave a like on the video. It really does help. I'll be most appreciative of that. Get involved in the comments. Let me know what you think and your opinions. I always like to see what you guys have to say. That is it for this video. Remember, we've got the by-election roundup video again on Friday. There's 7 to get through. Like I said, the Greens in Hale is going to be topical for this video, so we'll keep an eye on that. Please do come and join us on Friday to go through those by-elections. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.